It is 4 in the morning on the day you have planned for 4 years. The house smells like steam and starch, and the coffee you did not sleep enough to drink. And someone slips a garment bag under your door with a note that reads, "See you at noon." You run your fingers over the fabric through the bag and feel the beads and the weight you imagined for months. And for a second, everything is steady. Then you unzip the bag and your heart drops into a dozen sharp pieces because the lace is sliced, the train is stained with a brown ring, and there is a smell of something chemical you can almost taste on your tongue. That small, intimate betrayal breaks the world you expected for the day into ragged edges. My name is Maya Bennett. I am 29 years old. I work as a creative director for an event studio in Charlottesville, and I thought I knew every household secret in my family. I thought I had thought about everything for this wedding, but someone in my own blood decided to make the image of my life collapse 3 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. What they did was deliberate. They left evidence because they wanted me to know it was them, and what they did could not remain private. When I walked into that country club lawn that afternoon, I was not wearing the dress they tried to ruin. I was wearing an answer. There were receipts, timestamps, a hidden recording, a seamstress who stood by me, and a plan that turned a private humiliation into public accountability. Stay with me, because the day they tried to erase my dignity, they only revealed how deep the rot was, and why sometimes the safest place to tell the truth is in front of 200 people who think they know you. I grew up in a house that smelled always of lemon cleaner and coffee, in a neighborhood that kept up appearances like religion. My childhood involved picture-perfect holidays, a father who sat on the porch in starched shirts and told stories that always began with the town name, and a mother who orchestrated fundraisers and served on the country club board. We were the family people waved at on Sunday, the faces printed next to donation lists. I learned early that reputation was a currency and that silence bought status. My job as creative director made me obsess over details, to know how light would fall on a cake and where hands should be when vows were read. It made me meticulous with timelines, and it taught me to assume control where others loosened their grip. For the last 2 years, my sister Claire and I were my oldest anxiety. She was both the person who knew how to make me laugh in the middle of a crisis and the person whose quiet corrections made me second-guess every choice. The more I prepared for the wedding, the more I felt something like static between us. She would text short phrases at odd hours, show up late to dress fittings with eyes that moved too quickly, and laugh at things that were not jokes. I could name the china at my wedding, the florist, and the exact spot the photographer would hide, but I could not name the reason my sister began to speak to me in sentences that were small and cold. The day before the ceremony, she brought a steaming cup of tea into the room where my dress lay in its bag, and she smiled the smile our mother used in gala photographs. I believed that smile because I always wanted to believe it. Claire Elliott Bennett is the person everyone expects to be warm and witty until something in the room becomes inconvenient for her. She is 32, a manager at a boutique publishing house, and she has spent her adult life making sure the family name bent toward approval. People called her charming at dinners, persuasive on committees, and impeccably generous when cameras were present. Behind the applause, she kept a ledger of grievances and a habit of measuring affection with favors extracted. As a teenager, she learned to make accidents look like fate, to misplace things and then find them with a flourish that made you feel ashamed for ever losing trust. In recent years, Claire's competitiveness sharpened. She resented any moment when she was not the center of attention, or when my milestones shifted the narrative she wanted. She cultivated friendships that looked like alliances, and kept a notebook where she listed slights, imagined and real. She could be gentle in the most devastating ways, offering advice that landed like instruction and correcting my choices with the soft voice of concern. The wound she cut into my wedding dress belonged to someone who had rehearsed the motion of betrayal and made it look like an accident to anyone who did not know how to read the punctuation of her silences. The house that morning smelled of starch and an undertone of something metallic, like new batteries left on a windowsill. The bag lay against the doorframe, the zipper half open, as if someone had wanted to make sure I saw the damage. I felt the beads under my fingers and heard the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the distant sound of a car door shutting 2 houses down. My throat tightened. I called Claire, and she answered on the second ring as if she had been waiting. Our conversation unspooled into a series of exchanges that became the first long scene of the day. "Did you open it yet?" she asked, voice airy, household sounds small in the background. "I did," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "They cut the lace, and there is a stain." She made a small inhalation. "Oh, Maya, oh God, that's horrible." "Did you touch it?" I asked. "No, of course not," she said. "I would never." "Claire, someone cut the train," I said. "What are you talking about?" she said, as if she did not hear the words. Then she lowered her voice and said, "I can come by. Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay. Can you come now?" I said. "I can come, but maybe breathe," she told me. The words soft but precise. "Get here," I said. When she arrived, the house had the taste of burnt toast in the air, and her perfume was the jasmine our mother wore to galas. We sat at the kitchen table, and the dialogue lengthened into accusations and excuses, layered like a play with 10 acts. "Who would do this?" she asked, leaning forward. "I don't know," I answered. "Did you see anyone last night?" she asked. "No," I said. "We need to call Emma and the seamstress," she said. "We should call someone who can fix it," I said. "This is not normal," she said. "Do you think Mom could have known?" she asked. "I don't want to accuse anyone," I said, and I felt foolish for even imagining the possibility. The words between us grew taut. She kept touching the edge of a paper napkin like someone practicing a trick. The conversation had 12 exchanges by the time the seamstress arrived, and for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to feel fear as a physical thing in my stomach. The seamstress arrived with a tote bag heavy with tools and the smell of mint from gum on her breath. Emma Lopez had been recommended by a friend. She had the hands of someone who could take fabric and make it whole again. She set down a portable iron, a spool of thread the exact shade of ivory, and a small bottle of a solvent used to lift stains without dulling the lace. Emma's techniques felt almost ritual. She asked me to breathe as she dabbed at the stained train, and I felt the sensation of the solvent like a breath of lemon on my tongue. Emma looked at the cut edges and shook her head. "This is not an accident," she said. "These scissors were used with intent, and this stain was applied in a single motion." She lifted the fabric to the light, and an image of mole-like discoloration revealed itself. The senses in that kitchen scene stacked. The weight of the fabric heavy on the table, the clink of a spoon against ceramic as Claire stirred her coffee, the metallic scrape when Emma opened her tin of needles, the faint sweetness of the perfume, the sourness of panic at the back of my throat. Emma stayed and, by 11, had secured temporary repairs in case the permanent ones could not be completed. She also listened when I said I thought Claire might be involved and did not flinch. "People see what they want," she said, "but there are always marks." She found a single silver thread caught at the edge that did not belong to the dress and placed it in a small evidence envelope. At the time, I did not know the word chain of custody, but I would learn it before the day ended. There are moments when memory splices itself into fragments that are clearer than others. I remember a breakfast at 16 when Claire laughed loudly at a joke about our mother and seemed to time her smile to make me look less bright. I remember a scholarship announcement when she crowded into the photograph with a hand at my elbow and a face like a conqueror. I remember 20 small events that by themselves could be brushed away as sibling rivalry, but that together created a pattern. Those recollections are part of my backstory, and they shaped how I reacted when my life was threatened in the smallest physical details. As a child, I learned to retreat, to speak softly when the house was full, and to match the tonality of my mother's laughter so that my presence would not unsettle fundraisers. In college, I learned to build narratives for projects and to hold a room. My career thrust me into the orbit of people who made things appear effortless, and I spent my 20s making other people's images hold. Marriage felt like the culmination of those skills and the start of a life I had worked toward. I wanted to trust my sister. I also had a habit of picking at inconsistencies until I found the seam that made them unravel. As both a daughter of a family built on appearances and a professional who worked in moments of exposure, the attack on my dress felt like a personal and vocational violation all at once. Claire's backstory reads in a different hand. She grew up hungry for the spotlight, but careful with displays of need. Our mother taught her how to navigate donor lists and how to appear modest while still collecting accolades. Claire translated that education into a social skill set that made people believe she was selfless while she curated advantage. After college, she took a job that required tact and rewarded her for smoothing conflicts in public while keeping a private list of wrongs. People entrusted her with introductions and praised her at galas. At home, she perfected the art of the small cut, a joke made in the right company that turned into a rumor, a withheld condolence that became a story of indifference, a correction that made you doubt your own memory. Those behaviors accumulated into a disposition that could pivot from ally to adversary depending on who controlled the narrative. After our father died, she took on public duties with an efficiency that comforted the board of the country club and made her look indispensable. Those same instincts made her jealous in rooms where she was not king, and in the months before the wedding, there were signs that she resented the attention the event generated. She had been practicing her performance for as long as I had been practicing how to accept it. The discovery of the cut and the stain set the investigation in motion. I called my photographer, Ryan Cole, who had been with us for every step of the planning. I need everything from last night, I told him. Send me timestamps of any files, any backstage shots, anything. Ryan replied quickly, I was at the venue until midnight. I can pull my camera feed and the metadata. Ryan arrived within the hour with a camera bag and a gloom in his face like someone who had seen a lot and still felt the shock. He plugged in his drive and we looked at the timestamps. The footage showed a figure near our dressing room at 1:12 a.m. The quality was grainy, but you could see the outline of a woman wearing a light jacket and carrying a slim bag. The venue's security had a camera that caught the same time from a different angle. I called the country club manager, Daniel Hart, who answered with a voice softened by the etiquette of his position. We have the footage, he said. We will keep it secure. I told him to provide a download and to give me a time-stamped copy. Ryan exported the files, and we made a copy to give to Emma for analysis. The technical description of the camera files, the way metadata revealed the exact seconds when movement occurred, the chain of custody that Daniel promised to maintain, and the receipt from the venue bar where Claire had been seen on camera formed the beginning of a forensic bundle. The word proof stopped being abstract and became a series of files on a drive with names and timestamps. I listened as Ryan described his export process in the kitchen, the hum of the laptop filling the room, his voice flat with concentration. I can enhance the frames a bit, remove noise, he said. There is a woman who matches Claire's height. Can you tell the face? I asked. Not yet, he said, but the jacket has a distinctive patch. We cataloged the items, noted who handled them, and placed the small silver thread Emma had found into a labeled envelope. From that point on, we treated the morning like a crime scene, even though we did not involve police immediately. The first moment of sustained tension came when I called my parents and they suggested patience. The conversation with my mother shifted the ground beneath me into a room that smelled of lavender and denial. You must not make a scene, she said, voice steady in a way that sounded practiced. Weddings are about family. I could hear the dining room clock tick through the phone. This is not about making a scene, I said. Someone sabotaged my dress. You do not know that, she replied. You are upset. Let your father handle things when he returns. He was in Florida on a short trip. What are you saying? I asked. I am saying, darling, that perhaps you should consider a calm approach. People will talk. The way she said, people will talk, cut into me with the old force of adolescent shame. The second moment of tension arrived when I hung up and Claire texted me a single line, "You are overreacting," and then blocked me. My hands trembled so much that the coffee sloshed in its cup and left a ring on the table. The house felt suddenly full of voices. I sat on the stairs and listened to the muffled sound of neighbors preparing for a Saturday as if nothing had happened. For 5 minutes, I did nothing except feel how small the world could make me. And then I stood up, called Ryan, and said we were going to make this a public record, even if my mother wanted calm. That choice felt like walking past a cliff and not looking down. At approximately 1/3 through this story, there is a moment I want you to step in with me, because it is where I asked the audience to weigh in and where the comments became part of the healing. If you were in my place, how would you react when someone you love is the only person who could explain a wound, and everyone else asks you to be quiet? I felt anger, disbelief, confusion, and an ache that felt almost physical. Write in the comments, starting with, I would have, or I would have called. Begin your sentence that way so I can find the threads and read them. Your words matter because they teach me how other people have turned shock into action, and because comments have become a place where people who thought they were alone find each other. Share your experience briefly, but be kind. Tell me if you would have confronted, if you would have called the police, if you would have walked into the ceremony anyway. These replies help others to understand that there are options beyond silence and beyond performance, and they give me ideas about how to structure the next steps in this case. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Now come back, because what happens next is where evidence meets confrontation, and the story flips. The phase of gathering proof turned my kitchen into an operations room. We cataloged the files, the camera footage, a set of text messages between Claire and a friend named Allison that suggested she knew we would be away at a fitting, a receipt from the country club bar with a timestamp matching the footage, the silver thread in an envelope, and an audio recording I made without Claire knowing. The audio was a conversation I had orchestrated the night before when I asked her to come over under the guise of helping me with seating charts. I had positioned my phone in a plant near the table and recorded. The recording captured snatches, her voice low saying, "You do it and it will be over," and a laugh that turned into a cough. The audio file was clear enough to be transcribed and for a forensic lab to analyze the waveform to confirm no edits. Ryan worked on the metadata and showed me that the timestamps on his photos matched the server time from the club camera. Daniel, the manager, provided a chain of custody document in which he wrote that he had downloaded the footage, saved it to a secure drive, and handed it to me with a signature. I took photographs of the stain and sent them to a textile conservator who replied with an initial note describing a chemical discolorant consistent with a dye or tannin mixed with a solvent. I kept copies of every email and text and asked Emma to sign a statement about the thread she had found. Technical descriptions became paragraphs in a binder. The audio transcription, the camera file metadata lines, the receipt image with time and card last 4 digits blurred, the conservator's initial note, and Daniel's signed chain of custody. Each item had about 300 characters of description in our notes, explaining provenance and method, who handled it, when, and how it was secured. That level of paperwork felt like armor. The scene where we planned the reveal was dense with detail and conversation. Emma, Ryan, our cousin Theo, and a friend named Laura sat around my living room table, with the binder opened like a map. Theo, a lawyer in town who had grown up with us, said, "We can do this in a way that does not escalate. We can show the proof and demand answers." Laura, who works at the local paper, said, "I can prepare a statement for the press if you want this public." Emma added, "We can mend the dress well enough for a ceremony, but the stain will be visible in close photos, which is important." The dialogue moved in 10 rapid exchanges as we rehearsed lines and logistics. "You will walk in wearing something else," Theo said. "No," I said, "I will not give her the satisfaction." "If you do that, you risk the entire day," Laura said. "I understand. We need to think theater, not violence," Theo said. "We will have the proofs cued, and if they deny it in public, we will play the recording." "What if they call you hysterical?" I asked. "Then the evidence will contradict them," he said. "We will ask the pastor to pause the ceremony if things get heated," Laura suggested. "Pastor Bragg has been friends with the family for years. He owes you the courtesy to listen," Theo said. "He will, but we should let him hear the recordings first," I said. We practiced the timing, the place where Ryan would stand with his camera, where Laura would place her phone to live stream if necessary, and how to hold my composure. The room tasted like coffee, and the air had the tang of lemon from someone's cleaning cloth. I felt the sense of stakes as a physical pressure behind my eyes, like a pressure before a storm. The tension before the ceremony was almost unbearable. For a full 560 characters, I replayed the memory of pacing the bridal suite, the silk of my rehearsal blouse sliding against my skin, the perfume of the bridesmaids like a fog, the hiss of steam from the iron, and the heartbeat in my throat that felt loud enough to split the mirror glass. I remember my hands shaking as Emma stitched a temporary seam, and Ryan whispering that the footage was on his drive and would be ready when I asked. My phone buzzed with texts I did not open. Claire sent a single image of a bouquet with a smiling face and a caption, "Congratulations," hoping to empty the word of its meaning. The pastor walked in with a steady voice and said we were on time. Those seconds were slow as concrete, each breath measured. I made the choice to carry a folder with the copies of the evidence in my bouquet so that I could reach them without appearing to interrupt the ceremony. That planning was deliberate. The moment when we stepped outside to line up, the lawn smelled of cut grass, the sky was a wash of blue, and somewhere a child laughed. My chest felt hollow and full at the same time. The long walk down the aisle that followed was the culmination of months of rehearsal and minutes of terror. The climax, in public, occurred on the manicured lawn of the Magnolia Country Club, a place where my family had hosted charity luncheons for years and where our mother had been president of the board. 200 guests looked on in the light, and I felt every eye like a finger. The pastor began with a soft prayer, and then the officiant invited the couples to speak vows. As I approached the front, the dirt under my heels smelled like compost, and the air had the metallic tang of humidity. The ribbon of my temporary seam rasped faintly against my wrist. I held my folder in my left hand, and the moment crystallized. Claire sat in the second row with our mother by her side, eyes cool, a mask of sympathy. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, I did not speak. Instead, I waited until there was a lull, and then I took a breath and said, "Before vows are exchanged, I need to speak." The hush that followed was thick. The pastor blinked, then allowed me the floor. I asked the musician to lower the volume and asked Ryan to stand and display the footage on a screen we had placed for family pictures. The sequence of events unfolded in dialogue and display. I spoke crisply. "My name is Maya Bennett. I am the woman who was supposed to walk in this dress, and in the early hours of today, my gown was deliberately damaged." Claire looked at me and said, "Maya, what are you doing? Are you sure?" in a voice trained for the cameras. I played the audio. Her voice said, "You do it, and it will be over," followed by a laugh. The transcription scrolled on the screen with timestamps. The footage showed a figure near the dressing room. Daniel stood and verified his chain of custody, publicly stating he downloaded and handed the files to me. There was a shuffle in the crowd, murmurs like waves. "You cannot do this here," my mother said, rising like something mechanical. I turned to her and said, "I can and I will." The public reaction split. Some gasped, some stood with hands to mouths, others snapped photographs. 5 named people reacted in ways that matter. Claire, our mother Elizabeth, our father Robert, who arrived 30 minutes late and looked stunned, Daniel, the manager who authenticated the footage, and Pastor Greg, who paused and then asked for calm. Among the guests, Laura recorded, Theo whispered legal steps, and Ryan captured expressions. The exchange between us stretched into a long dialogue with 12 short back and forths as family members moved between denial and anger. There were whispers that felt like nails and a palpable shifting of reputation as neighbors recalculated stories they had told themselves for years. The immediate fallout included frantic phone calls, the arrival of a small cluster of reporters from the local paper, and a priest who asked for a pause to prevent escalation. Claire stood and said in public, "This is a private matter, Maya. You are ruining our family." And my mother added, "You are being dramatic." I replied, I am presenting evidence. The pastor asked me to give the recording to him privately. I handed it over, and he listened, and then looked at the room and asked for persons of authority to come forward. Daniel offered his signed chain of custody, and Theo explained how we had preserved metadata. Moments later, a reporter named Karen from the Gazette approached and asked for comment. She had covered our family events before, and now she held a recorder with a taut face. Her questions were pointed and public, and they mattered because they brought the story beyond the lawn. Within the hour, clippings circulated online, and the local paper published the thread of events with images of the stain and quotes from the recording. The country club put Claire on temporary leave from the board pending an internal review. In the days after the ceremony, the consequences unfolded like a map being redrawn. There were texts and voicemails that accused me of spectacle and others that offered sympathy. Daniel, the manager, put his resignation on hold while he cooperated with the internal review. Emma's conservator report came back with a finding that the stain consisted of tannin mixed with a solvent consistent with an applied discolorant, and the lab wrote a short statement about how such a compound could be used deliberately to mask or mimic age spots on fabric. The transcript of Claire's voice was published in the local paper and created a ripple effect that reached the church council and the board of the country club. The president of the club, Margaret Lowe, issued a statement promising an independent inquiry and temporarily removing Claire from any volunteer committees. The backlash was swift. My mother called me furious and then apologetic. Our father tried to mediate and then avoided the subject altogether. Claire hired an attorney and denied intentional sabotage, but her presence in the community shifted. Friends we had since childhood texted in confusion or silence. The repercussion was not simply a moral victory. It was an administrative and social recalibration that made long-standing alliances wobble. The moments of tension did not end at the ceremony. One night a week later, someone left a bouquet of dead magnolias at my front door with a note that read, "Be careful," and a photograph of the church bulletin. I held the flowers and felt the cold of fear and also a residual steadiness that came from having acted. The second extended moment of tension occurred when our mother hosted a dinner and invited neighbors and donors. And there, in the middle of a quiet soup, Claire walked in as if nothing had happened. The room smelled of roasted garlic, and the clink of silverware became a low drum. I watched as guests shifted their alliances and felt the familiar ache of being judged by faces I once trusted. I could have left, I could have made a scene, and instead I stayed, answered questions calm and blunt, and presented the statement of facts to anyone who asked. The third moment of tension was the church council meeting, where I was invited to present evidence. My hands shook as I held the microphone, and the pastor looked at me with something like sorrow and something like relief that the truth was out. Those choices to stand in public and answer questions were moments when the private hurt became civic record. The technical descriptions that made this story resolvable were small and precise, and I will list them like items in a box so you see how evidence becomes narrative. The audio file. A 32-second recording with wave format metadata showing a timestamp of 1:03 a.m., wave format analysis confirming continuous capture and no edits, and a transcription matching the original file. The camera footage. 2 MP4 files from venue cameras with synchronized timestamps, noted location angles, and an enhanced frame showing a jacket with a distinctive patch that matched a jacket registered in a guest photo. The receipt. A digital receipt from the Country Club Cafe showing a card transaction at 1:15 a.m. with last 4 digits matching a card used by an auxiliary member of staff. Each of these items had chain of custody notes signed by the deliverers and copies stored in secure cloud storage with checksums to prevent alteration. The Fabric Conservator Report. An initial lab memo of 72 words describing chemical composition consistent with applied dye plus solvent and noting the stain pattern inconsistent with wear. These descriptions are precise because the difference between rumor and fact in a scandal can be a line in a report. The epilogue of this story unfolds in months, and I will describe it in 3 temporal snapshots. 1 month later, I had filed a formal complaint with the country club, and Claire had resigned from her volunteer positions while the internal review continued. The local paper had published a piece with the evidence summary, and several neighbors came forward to share similar stories of manipulation. I had meetings with a counselor to help process the betrayal and began to understand the ways that silence had been a protection for the family and a weapon for those who felt entitled. Community donations were reassessed, and the club began a review of their governance policies. 1 month after the reveal, I learned to sleep again in fits and starts, and I started drafting a short statement for my social channels that balanced fact and personal reflection without spectacle. 3 months after the event, the club announced formal findings that recommended further action and mediation between my mother and me, and a small number of board members stepped down. Claire had engaged legal counsel and filed a countersuit alleging defamation, which created a slow legal process that loomed like weather on the horizon. I started a small initiative with Laura and Ryan to help other brides and event clients document their planning steps, including a template for preserving proof and a network of trusted vendors. The community response included a petition for transparent governance at the club and a private group that formed to support members who had raised concerns. Professionally, I returned to work with a new focus on ethics and transparency in events production, and the studio where I worked instituted a policy about documenting third-party interactions to protect clients. 6 months after the ceremony, the legal process had settled into negotiation, and a portion of the board at the country club implemented a code of conduct and a formal chain of custody protocol for incidents on their property. Claire and I had not reconciled, but she reached out to ask about mediation. Our mother gave a statement acknowledging the need to listen more to the younger generation and to reassess how reputation had kept people quiet. The local paper ran a follow-up piece about systemic issues in small-town power structures and highlighted the new safeguards at the club. I started a small nonprofit project. Personally, I had moments of sadness when I thought about the sister I had once shared a room with, and moments of relief when I saw small changes in the neighborhood. Overall, the arc moved from private humiliation to public accountability and then to structural change that, while incomplete, offered a model for others. After all of this, I can say that the story taught me about the precariousness of reputation and the consolidating force of silence. In a house where appearances were worshipped, I had to choose truth over comfort. Allies emerged in unexpected places. Emma, the seamstress who refused to normalize the cut, Ryan, the photographer who treated metadata like testimony, Theo, the cousin who translated friendship into legal steps, Laura, the reporter who framed the narrative without sensationalizing suffering, and Daniel, the manager who honored his duty to preserve evidence. Those names are not heroes by themselves. They are people who chose to act with a sense of fairness that was practical and brave. If you were moved by this, consider subscribing to follow the story as it evolves into formal proceedings and community work. If you ever face a moment where someone tries to make your life a stage for their private grievances, remember to document, preserve, and seek allies. Leave a comment starting with "I would have" or "I would have called" so I can gather your responses and we can build a resource for others. Share this video with anyone planning an event who might need a checklist for protecting their moment. This is not a call to escalate every slight. It is a call to keep careful records when something feels intentionally harmful. In the final accounting, I walked into the country club not as a victim, but as a woman who refused to let the narrative of her life be edited by others. The scandal resulted in resignations, a review, and a conversation about how families police reputations. Some people lost social standing, others found new purpose. My relationship with my sister remains complicated. The legal threads are still being worked, and the repairs to the dress were never perfect. But I left that lawn with a different sense of what family could be, less about untroubled photographs and more about accountability. The last line of this chapter is not revenge, but a small, enduring metaphor. When someone cuts at lace to try to unmake you, do not hide the wound. Show it under the light so the truth can be stitched into something stronger.